Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Good morning, everyone. I am Antonis Polemitis. I'd like to welcome you all to session 1 of MOOC 9, DFIN 511, Introduction to Digital Currencies of the University of Nicosia. This is the 9th time we have taught this MOOC. That's why we refer to it as MOOC 9. It was first taught in spring 2014 when it was the first university course in the world taught on cryptocurrency and related issues like blockchains. This is now the 9th time we're running it. It's co-taught by me, Antonis Polemitis, and Andreas Antonopoulos, who I'm sure most of you know as one of the leading, if not the leading, technical evangelist for cryptocurrencies and for Bitcoin in particular. The course is going to be divided up between Andreas and me. We'll each do 6 sections. He will handle the more technical aspects, and I will handle the more business-oriented aspects. I'll make a quick side note. I just saw a comment scroll by. Why the necktie? I actually had to go to a photo shoot outside the university today, and so I had to get fully dressed up, including with a necktie. Usually, you will not be seeing me with a necktie. In any case, the format of this course and the approach of this course is going to be the following. As you've seen, every week we will release a set of material in the learning management system. And once that material is released, you'll have a few days to read it, to get involved in the forums with answering the questions and the assignments. And at the end of each week, there will be a live session on Google Hangouts, where we'll have about an hour to answer questions that people have submitted. Depending on the session, we sometimes get to some of the questions or all of the questions. In this case, today, we might not get to all of them. There were quite a few this time, but that's generally going to be the format. At the end of the session, at the end of the course, there will be an examination, and those who pass the examination will receive a certificate for the program, which will be written into the blockchain. This course and the university were the first to ever put any academic certificates into the blockchain back in 2014. And then we were the first to put student diplomas in the blockchain in 2015. And then we were the first last year to put all student diplomas on the blockchain in 2017. And in general, before I begin, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about this initiative at the University of Nicosia, and this initiative and a little bit about the University of Nicosia, why we're doing it, what this all means to us. The University of Nicosia is the largest university in Cyprus. We are a comprehensive university. We have about 12,000 students in 6 schools, 18 departments, about 100 programs of study at the bachelor's, master's, and doctoral level. And our main campuses here in Cyprus, and we also have some programs, about 25 of our 100-degree programs we offer online or also offer online. We think we're the largest university in Southern Europe that teaches in English in terms of the number of students that we have. And beyond our general programs, we have a focus on some cross-functional interdisciplinary areas. One is blockchains and cryptocurrencies. The other is machine learning and artificial intelligence. And the third is augmented and virtual reality. So these are topics that we study as topics, but we also study them in various academic disciplines. So machine learning, for example, is not just in the computer science department, but it is also in the School of Medicine as a topic. So with cryptocurrencies, blockchains, digital currencies, I think by most observers' view, we are the most developed university in the world. So we were the first to offer a class. We were the first to offer a degree program. We were the first to put academic certificates on the blockchain. We were the first to put diplomas on the blockchain. We were the first to accept Bitcoins for tuition. And we now, I think, have both the largest number of students on this topic and the largest number of faculty and staff working on this topic. So our team, full-time faculty, part-time faculty, administrative staff working on cryptocurrency and blockchain issues is around 35 people. We now have over 300 students on the Masters in Digital Currency. They come from over 40 countries, though 75% of the students are from the US, Canada, and Western Europe, but they're students from everywhere in the world. And we think it's a super important topic. And I'll take a second to talk about why I think this topic's important. And the general theory we have, that we concluded in 2013 when we first started looking into Bitcoin at the time, was that it's not, the key point isn't whether or not Bitcoin is a good currency, and we'll have lots of chats about that in this course, but the technology that allowed Bitcoin to exist and the fact that Bitcoin exists as a public blockchain is analogous for transactions and for value and for trust to what the internet did for communication and dissemination of information. And so this isn't a small topic. It isn't a one-time topic. It isn't a topic that has to do with the price of any particular cryptocurrency on any particular day. We think it's a topic that is 20 to 30 years long. It is going to be a topic like the way the internet had thousands of effects from the early 90s when it first started getting popularized until today. We think cryptocurrencies and blockchain-based systems will allow us to organize vast sectors of society in different ways. They'll allow us to think about transactions to be organized in different ways, rights to be allocated in different ways, human activity to be organized in different ways, and machine-to-machine activity to be organized in different ways. And this means this is an endlessly interesting topic. It is a topic that is fantastic for both research and for academic study. We couldn't be more thrilled about how our focus on decentralization is going. We intend to keep developing further in this area. And one of the things that's very important to us is, in fact, this MOOC, where it allows us to bring together a community around the world that's actually much bigger than the students or faculty in our program. So I think with this MOOC, we're over 20,000 people who have participated in this MOOC. People complete this MOOC at vastly higher rates than any other MOOC in history. And I hope your class continues in the same way, and so that you can be part of history and you can also have your participation written for eternity into the blockchain. And I hope some of you proceed to do the masters afterwards. This will count as credit for the first course in the masters, and then you'll have another 8. But we're also working now in other ways you can stay connected with us and with your classmates and colleagues. Every year we'll be running a conference called Decentralized. We ran it for the first time in 2017. It was a huge success, and we're in the planning phases now for fall 2018. And we will be launching a web portal beyond the learning management system to allow people to interact on different topics, both academic topics and research topics relating to cryptocurrency, but also also job-related topics, and so on. So that's going to come live during this MOOC. So keep an eye out for that. And I mean, it's super important to us that we stay in touch and engage with you, because it's such a fast developing area. There are exciting things happening everywhere in the world on this topic, and many of you are involved in that. And so we learn as much from you in many cases as you learn from us. And it's been very interesting when we see this in even more detail for some of the students in the program. So there's some things I'm comfortable saying. If you develop an expertise in cryptocurrency and blockchain, it will be, on the whole, very good for your career. There are millions of people who are needed in these fields, not just software developers, not just people in startups, but accountants need to know about it, and lawyers need to know about it, and government regulators need to know about it. Everyone needs to know about it. And there's massive demand for this area, and there's not that many people who know anything about it. So generally, we're seeing graduates from the program have huge interest from employers for them. We must get calls weekly saying, hey, do you know people who can go work in this area? And from major global employers. So I think it's a very good career choice to be thinking about this topic, regardless of the fact that it's an interesting topic in and of itself to be thinking about. We have seen amazing things done by the graduates and alums. And one of the videos we have online, and maybe Andreas can share it, is of a student in our first class who was a physician in Philadelphia. He took the course and he became the chief medical officer of Blockchain Health, a Silicon Valley startup focused on using the blockchain for medical research. Well, this is exciting new times when a doctor in Philadelphia does an online course from a university in Cyprus and then proceeds to get a job in Silicon Valley. So we've had entrepreneurs, we've had central bankers, we have had people go off and launch companies, launch funds. So it really is the case that this isn't a dry, stable field of study where everything was done dozens or hundreds of years ago. Some of our students are currently doing things that then end up in the newspaper the next day as being important things happening in cryptocurrency. I'll mention just one. One of our graduates was involved in the DAO 2 weeks after graduation, the DAO on Ethereum. And, that obviously did not end up super well for the DAO itself, but it was certainly one of the most important developments in Ethereum. And it came from one of our graduates in one of our early periods for the master's program when he had a little bit more time. Anthony Diorio taught one of the classes. He's one of the co-founders, so to speak, of Ethereum. Andreas is one of the current leading experts in the space. So it really makes for an interesting community. We want you guys to engage. We want you to stay involved through this whole MOOC. We would love it if you then came to the MSc or did one of our shorter professional certificates. But even if you don't do that, we would love it for you to stay involved. And we're going to hopefully try and make a better platform for that. So I know that was a little bit long and it's not the questions of this session, but I like to do this in the first session so that we get them out of the way now. If at any point in time you're having any questions about the program itself or the course or technical issues or any of those topics, Andreas Vlachos, who is the academic coordinator, the technical coordinator on this program, is very active online. Find him in Moodle, find him on Twitter, find him wherever you need to find him, and he will try and resolve whatever issue you have. I am less likely to, the best way to find me, to be perfectly honest, is on Twitter. It's where I have the least inbound emails and so on. I get an awful lot. I'm not I'm less involved in some of the other mechanisms, but I'm at Polemitis on Twitter, and so feel free to DM me there. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I am happy to help in any way that I can. And to answer the question someone asked about PhDs, I think there are one or two thesis proposals in now for PhD students that are going to start in 2018 doing their PhD in this topic. And we're actually looking for a couple of postdocs for funded positions here at the university, one to work on zero knowledge proofs and one to work on governance in blockchains. And so if anyone's interested in those funded positions, also reach out. Okay, with that, I'm going to try and answer some of your questions. I'm trying to keep an eye as I can to the chat, though it's going pretty fast. I have the questions printed out here. So I'll see if I can handle anything that else comes in. I don't know if I'll get to it. In the meantime, I'll try and go through these questions. Okay, first question. Would it be right to say that Bitcoin is inflationary until the last Bitcoin has been mined, even though the price has risen, exponentially risen over the last 9 years? Well, yes and no, and it depends on what version of inflationary we mean. Generally, when people talk about currency and talk about inflationary, what they mean is the purchasing power of the currency is falling. So that today you can buy fewer eggs, fewer cars, fewer houses with a certain amount of a certain currency. By that metric, given the rise in price in US dollars of a Bitcoin, it is definitely not inflationary. Now, the other definition that sometimes people use is, are the number of Bitcoins going up over time? Well, by that metric, it is lightly inflationary. So there is every 10 minutes, an extra 12.5 Bitcoins are created on an exponentially reducing schedule over the next dozens of years. And so it is from a technical perspective, inflationary in that more Bitcoins are being created. But from an economic perspective, in terms of what people mean, is a currency inflationary, does the purchasing power going down, is what they mean. It's not. It has not been in practice, right? So someone says the purchasing power of the dollar or the bolivar is inflationary. They usually aren't so concerned about how many units of bolivars are out there. They're concerned about what you can buy with a unit of bolivar. And so I think by that definition, it's not actually inflationary. Now, I will go to the exact next question, which is, if Bitcoin has a limited supply, would it not be prone to deflation? So this is the opposite question. And this is one that is asked very often. It's asked in every MOOC. It's very common online by economists. And what the question means is the following. Say, well, modern economic theory, Keynesian economic theory, says that deflation is something to avoid in a currency. So you don't want currencies to deflate, because if currency is deflating, it means your purchasing power is going up every year. And if your purchasing power is going up every year, you're not going to be interested in spending. And so if you don't spend, people won't produce. If they don't produce, they will fire people. If they fire people, then there's going to be even less demand, so people buy fewer things, and you get into this deflationary cycle that creates a negative cycle. So most central banks prefer for currencies to be mildly inflationary. let's say 2% a year as a common target for the US and the Eurozone. Having said that, so by that metric, it is deflationary, okay? It is deflationary, but I'm not sure it actually matters, because deflationary is important when it's the unit of account of a country. Bitcoin is not the unit of account of any country and is a long way from being the unit of account of any country. I think it is better thought of as an asset, as a commodity. And if it's thought of as an asset or a commodity, the fact that it goes up in price is interesting, but it's certainly not deflationary to the economy. So, for example, the shares of Apple have gone up in price tremendously in the last 10 years. Nobody worries that the United States will fall into a deflationary spiral because people holding Apple shares can now buy more things in exchange for their Apple share, more by selling their Apple shares and buying other things. So Bitcoin's, I think, closer to serving like shares of Apple in an economy than as the US dollar in the economy, in which case I don't think you worry so much about deflation. Now, we talk a little bit more in session 6 about central banking, and we'll cover these in more detail then, but I think on the whole, it's not a huge issue. Why do you think the world is still so attached to gold as a store of value after currencies are not pegged to gold? It's a good question. I think it's, first of all, so attached is an interesting question. I think the estimates for the value of all gold are in the order of $7 trillion. All world assets are several hundreds of trillions of dollars. So it's not a huge percentage of global world value in any case. So it's low single digit percentage points. Now, why are people still attached to it? I think it's a combination of two things. One, gold has held value for thousands of years, and so it has a track record. It has a track record, even if most of the value is a bubble of sorts, that like it's not the value you'd get for jewelry or the value you get for industrial uses. The reality is people have valued gold for a very long time, so people will believe that gold will have value in the future for a very long time. And so I think that's why I wouldn't say the world is attached to gold necessarily, but demand falling to zero is unlikely anytime soon for gold. So it maintains a certain value that is non-trivial. I mean, $7 trillion is non-trivial, but it's also not the major asset class by any stretch of the imagination. We have two questions. I don't know if they're from the same person because they sound similar. I'm going to read them together. How can Bitcoin enforce fungibility if there are some Bitcoin addresses associated with illegal activities, and therefore people decide to avoid Bitcoins from those addresses to avoid future repercussion? How does fungibility lead to anonymity? And then, how does fungibility lead to possible future regulations of Bitcoin and the ability to trace transactions in the public ledger as developers attempt to make Bitcoin more anonymous? So fungibility is a property of money that says one unit is equivalent to another unit. Cash is, generally speaking, fungible. If I get $20 from my baker, or $20 from my butcher, or $20 from my buddy because he owes me $20 for a drink, the $20 can be then treated in the same way. It doesn't come with special conditions attached to it. Bitcoin is a little bit less fungible than cash because dollars don't carry around their history unless someone is, marking on a dollar bill in order to do, I don't know, some type of drug sting. Generally, dollars do not carry their history with them. Bitcoin, you can see the history of a specific Bitcoin. This hasn't been tested in court, but there's some interesting precedent that at least the United States considers Bitcoins fungible. And what I mean is the following. When the US government seized Bitcoins from Silk Road, they then auctioned them off. So those were Bitcoins that the US government itself said were proceeds of an illegal activity. And then the US government itself took those proceeds, ran a public auction, sold them to whoever bought them, and took the money in exchange from whoever bought them and deposited in the treasury. So they took a view that, in effect, they were not tainted in some way forever and then couldn't therefore be used and what have you. So I think on the whole, people treat them in practice as fungible, but it's not fully tested in all jurisdictions, under all scenarios, under all legal systems. I think there's still a little bit of a question mark on that topic. I mean, could I imagine some future world where certain Bitcoins trade at a little bit of a discount? Yeah. Do some people pay a little bit of a premium for freshly mined Bitcoins that have no transaction history? I guess conceivably. Will things like CoinJoin or mixers, if they work well, make Bitcoin more fungible? Definitely. That's definitely the case. So, and will this bring more or less regulation? Don't know. I mean, not sure it's technically feasible to the degree that Bitcoin has some fungibility or has some anonymizers that regulation can stop it from, or just passing a law. People might try and de-anonymize, like the way they try and de-anonymize Tor, or they try and de-anonymize encryption. But, one of Bitcoin's very interesting properties is that it is decentralized and there's no one in charge. So let's say someone wanted to say, no, we need Bitcoin to change the way it does X. Please add this in. And it's a court order. There's no place really to send the court order to. Whereas, to take a relevant example, Ripple signed a consent decree with the US government on some certain topics and agreed to make some changes. I'm not saying they're bad changes, but there was someone there that someone could come and enforce something against. With Bitcoin, it's not clear. I mean, you could go after the users or the miners, but that's a big project to go after the users or the miners, and governments don't really like to do that, right? I mean, it's like saying, oh, well, I'm going to go after people who have MP3 files that are not necessarily from the source disk. It's hard. It's hard to go after millions and millions of people and say, don't run Bitcoin. It'll happen in, I think, some more closed governments. But I think in a relatively open government, in a relatively technologically sophisticated jurisdiction, like, for example, the United States, I think it's going to be hard to enforce user level restrictions. And so that doesn't leave any place for the regulators to say, please make this change in Bitcoin. So what happens there? They focus on the on and off ramps, which are, for most people, exchanges. So people generally get de-anonymized on the exchanges, because when you buy or sell Bitcoins, you have to put in your information. And that is applicable. All the normal anti-money laundering and know your customer requirements are applicable there. And so that's where the de-anonymization happens. On the whole, I consider Bitcoin to be significantly less anonymous than cash, for whatever that's worth. All right, I'll go for an easy question. If Bitcoin sees further deflation, will it not become commonplace for micropayments to just be quoted in Satoshis than fractions of a Bitcoin? Yes. You see this now on fees. So when people are quoting fees for sending a Bitcoin transaction, they are generally quoted in Satoshis per byte, as opposed to going 0.0000000 Bitcoins. So absolutely, that's going to be the case. If cryptocurrencies are so volatile right now, what could limit that speculation and guarantee people will get over this and really use it as a medium of exchange? Generally, I believe that volatility. So why is Bitcoin volatile now? Bitcoin is volatile because the value of Bitcoin is more or less solely based on a current view on what a future view is going to be if there's going to be demand to use Bitcoins for some function, whether that function is holding some wealth in a decorrelated asset or holding some wealth in a digital asset or using Bitcoin to make machine payments or whatever the various usage cases one could use Bitcoin for. And there's no cash flow stream from it to ground the valuation. So the valuation is purely a crowd-sourced guess on what the future crowd's interest is going to be in this asset. Now, what that means is the price then ends up being extraordinarily sensitive to good or bad news, because as people see good or bad news, they kind of get happier or sadder about future prospects. And so that part's not going away for a while. And the second part, it's still, by currency standards, a lightly traded currency. Now, huge leaps have been made. So there are 15 billion of Bitcoin US dollars traded every day, I think, which is huge leaps from a few years ago. But Euro US dollars is 6 trillion every day. It's still 100 times more. And so as more people trade, as there are more ways for people to sell long, go short, put institutional money in, I think you will see the volatility slowly start to diminish because there's more liquidity. So a certain person changing their mind one way or another doesn't impact the overall market much. Having said that, I think it's still going to be relatively volatile for quite some time. I don't think there's any version of a limiting speculation. I think the way you limit speculation is through more and more speculation. So the speculation cancels things out. And as a medium of exchange, one could lock in a price and, particularly things like Lightning, you could use it as a medium of exchange without using it as a unit of account, right? So I think we're a long way away from anyone using it as a unit of account. But you could use it, I think, as a medium of exchange, even today. What impact might we see on supply and demand when a currency forks? Is this something we've seen before in history, e.g. the switch from clams to coins in North America in the 17th century? Okay, a question on supply and demand on the forks. It's interesting because we're starting now to get some empirical evidence, right? Like forks have really been a 2017 exercise, and now there's a bunch more of them happening in 2018. I think forks will have diminishing marginal returns. I mean, look at Bitcoin. So Bitcoin Cash was a big fork. Bitcoin Gold was a smaller fork. Now there's like a fork coming every week on Bitcoin, and I don't think anyone even pays any attention. So forks for the purpose of just being forks, I think will not have huge value if there's not a big community supporting it for a certain purpose. So I think you're seeing those diminishing marginal returns on forks even today, even in Bitcoin. What I don't know, I haven't thought about, it's the first time I've seen this question, is there a concept of forks earlier in history, something truly like a fork that we're seeing now. And I haven't thought about this. Switching from one type of currency to another is not really a fork. Because if you had a bunch of clams, it doesn't mean you're going to get an equivalent bunches of coins, right? That's just there's a different currency. And so I think we need to look into that. If there's really been a fork before, then people come in one day and say, everyone has this many X, we're also going to give you the same number of Y, and you'll have that as well. I think this is a topic for us to look into. I don't know the answer. In Cyprus in 2008, Cyprus joined the Euros, and so Cyprus pounds were exchanged for Euros. But again, it wasn't a fork, it was a change. At the end of it, you just had Euros. You had a Cyprus pound, and you went and it converted to 1.71 euros. You had 1.71 euros and 0 Cyprus pounds. A fork is more like you have a Cyprus pound, and now you also have a euro, and you can decide which chain to stay on or stay on both chains. And it is not clear if this has happened before cryptocurrencies. I need to look into it. When the adoption of coinage first spread, a proliferation of different coins was launched. Over time, they consolidated substantially. Is this an eventual possibility for cryptocurrencies, which are currently in the stage of proliferation? I think the answer is definitely yes. I believe cryptocurrencies are the type of thing that will follow a power law. So they won't be normally distributed. They'll be distributed like this. So the leading cryptocurrency will be pretty big. The second leading one will be significantly smaller, but still pretty big. Same for the third. And by the time you get to the 10th, it's much, much smaller than the first. And by the time you get to the 50th, it's much, much smaller than the 10th. And to get to the 500th or the 100th is much smaller than the 50th. And there's a very long tail of cryptocurrencies that won't do much at all. I mean, there's already over 1,100 cryptocurrencies, but I'll be lucky if I could rattle off more than 20 or 30, and I'm supposedly an expert, right? So I don't think cryptocurrency number 752 is going to have a very big market cap, a lot of trading, a lot of liquidity, or a lot of usage. So yes, many things will get launched. Most of them will fail. Cryptocurrencies might change in position. Some big ones might ultimately fail. But I think the final state is going to be a power law in terms of the distribution. The ability to inflate a currency is crucial for the well-being of an economy. BTC cannot be inflated beyond a certain predetermined point, which protects the long-term value of the currency. How do we reconcile these two seemingly opposing points? The reconciliation of these 2 points is that Bitcoin is not the unit of account of any country. So it's important for this concern about being deflationary and hurting the economy only applies to the unit of account of a country. So if Bitcoin is more like an asset or a commodity, those two things aren't incongruent with each other. Why would there be a more stable price of BTC when the futures markets between BTC and fiat will develop? This one's in the bucket of who knows. Bitcoin has certainly not been more stable since the launch of futures markets. I believe at a very, very high level, if you have a lot of liquidity, a lot of institutional investors, a lot of mechanisms by which people can buy, sell, trade Bitcoin over time, the price will become less volatile. But I think today there are still other factors that are driving the volatility, and I'm not sure it's an automatic reduction in volatility by having futures, even though many people actually predicted that, in fact. How private is Bitcoin as a cryptocurrency when all transaction data is on a public ledger? It's pseudonymous Bitcoin. It is not fully anonymous. You can make it close to fully anonymous by taking very careful steps to do that, but that's not easy. I think for an average user, it's pseudonymous. You can be de-anonymized to a large degree using Bitcoin. Isn't scarcity violated and stability threatened if Bitcoin cryptos can be forked endlessly? I think not. I think it is more a matter of degree as opposed to of size. So again, I look at what we're seeing with Bitcoin. So the first fork, Bitcoin Cash, tends to hold about 7 to 15%, that's where it's traded, of the market capitalization of Bitcoin. The second fork, Bitcoin Gold, is 3%. Third, fourth, fifth, it gets lower and lower and lower and lower. And eventually, I believe fork number 53, no one's even going to remember what it is. And so forks are not immune. I guess, let me put it this way. Forks are no different from this perspective than new coins. So we've heard this argument before. Well, sure, Bitcoin is scarce, but if anyone can launch a cryptocurrency, it's not scarce. Well, the reality is we have 1,100 cryptocurrencies now, of which 1,050 of them nobody cares about. So sure, they might be increasing the supply of crypto somehow, but if they don't have adoption, if they don't have a reason for being, if there's no network being built around them, it kind of doesn't matter, right? Like, I can obviously go tomorrow and launch Polemitis coin. Would it matter? Would anyone care? Would people get involved? Probably not, unless there was some compelling reason. And compelling reasons that build a network of people who care are rare and difficult. There are absolutely network effects in cryptocurrency, just like there are network effects in most digital topics. So I think forking is just another variation of new coin development. It's a mechanism by which to launch a coin, in effect. And in that case, I think the answer is, sure, some of the value that might have accrued to Bitcoin is effectively sitting in other coins or other forks. There's no doubt about that. But it doesn't mean that Bitcoin scarcity is particularly hugely threatened because of coin number 153, right? Like, scarcity isn't efficient. It's sufficient for something that has value. Like, it has to be scarce and people have to want it. So many things can be scarce. I could launch Polemitis coin and say, look, it's only these two pieces of paper. There's only two of them. It's the scarcest coin in the world. It wouldn't mean that people would pay huge amounts of money for this piece of paper just because they're scarce. There has to be a reason people want it. So the demand side, and I think it's easier to analyze this to the demand side. All right, why do people have demand for Bitcoin? One of the reasons people have demand for Bitcoin, leave aside whatever things it can do, it's the one that you can do those things in the most places. Even if all you want to do is hold it as a store of value, you care about how easy it is to then get your money back out, right? So an illiquid number 150 coin that nobody ever uses, it's hard for there to be demand for that. So just because you can do it doesn't mean anyone cares if you can do it. And you've seen this with other digital businesses. I mean, I think a year after Twitter was launched, there must have been 150 clones of Twitter, of which today I can't remember a single one of them. Because the whole point of Twitter, the hard part about Twitter isn't the ability to post 140 characters, or now 280. The hard part is getting a whole community working on there so that people can chat with each other. Do you think businesses will create their own currency in the same fashion they created their own internet websites, brands, set of values, internal processes, etc.? Well, some people do in fact do this. I think on the whole, these are not going to be hugely effective for the same reason we just described. So number 150 coin or number 550 coin, if it's launched by, I don't know, Coca-Cola, still doesn't make it a particularly interesting value proposition. So I think you might have ultimately some interesting marketplaces to exchange some type of digital assets, perhaps of things like airline points or game credits or game assets. So I think some things like that will emerge, but I don't see a particularly important need for a company to launch its own cryptocurrency just as a company. Now, cryptocurrencies or blockchains could be interesting if they serve some business purpose of the company. Like if the business model is designed to take advantage of that, that's one thing. If your business is whatever it is today and you just say, I want to slap a cryptocurrency on it, I don't think that's going to work, to be honest. Please explain legal tender. Are banknotes considered legal tender? Legal tender is, in a certain country, a type of currency that someone is sort of forced, and I don't know if it's forced or forced in air quotes, to accept as a repayment of debt. So if I invoice you for services to the University of Nicosia and you show up with euros, I should accept them. I mean, it's weird because in practice, in any kind of reasonably functioning currency, no one actually has to force anyone to do anything. I mean, people are perfectly happy to accept payment and in a reasonably well-functioning currency. So I think so we hear this argument quite a bit sometimes from the perspective of like, oh, well, but if XYZ isn't legal tender, will it have value? Will people accept it? Well, there are many, 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 many thousands of things that are not legal tender that have value and that people would be happy to accept. You know, if you wanted to walk in here and give me a brick of gold, I would accept it, even though it's not legal tender. If you wanted to come give me a piece of property, I would accept it, if it's not legal tender. I saw this in the comments, I'll make my little joke on this. If someone wants to bring a Lambo, we'll take it. Right? It's not legal tender, but doesn't mean it doesn't have value. So people sometimes mix up, like, well, if it's not legal tender, then it can't actually be valuable. Or I'm not sure that's actually so relevant for anything. What's more important is there a liquid market to be able to convert it into the unit of account of your country? Right? That's kind of the important thing. Shares of Apple are not legal tender, but I can convert them to real life dollars I can use to buy a sandwich more or less instantaneously. So I think the legal definition of legal tender tends to be not that important in practice. Do you think Western Digital, I think the person means Western Union, and MoneyGram, both money transfer businesses, will go out of business and become the past? And I believe certainly not in the immediate future. But I do think their business model will be pressured over time. So for them to, they tend to serve remittances purposes, right? Primarily. And for them to go away, the type of people who would like to send remittances tend to be people with less access to traditional banking services on the whole. There's some exceptions. Or they're going on routes not well served by traditional banking pairs. So in that case, I think we have quite a ways to go before there's enough adoption of cryptocurrency, and it's easy enough to swap it in and out of your national sovereign currency, and that people will be just sending their remittances with Bitcoin rather than with the Western Union. So it's not going to happen immediately. But I do think over time, it's hard to imagine a big success case for cryptocurrencies without more people saying, maybe this is a faster, cheaper way for me to send money to someone else. So there's no version where from one day to the next, these businesses go out of business. But I do think they will be pressured on, I think, their pricing primarily. Very few things go out of business completely, right? Like, we still have bank tellers, even though we have ATMs. We still have radio, even though we have TV and internet and what have you. But there will be market share shifts, I think, in the medium term and the long term on this topic, even though they're not immediately happening yet. Will adoption of Bitcoin affect the price of gold? This is a double price prediction. So this is just like what's happening with crypto, what's going to happen to the price of gold. And as on all price predictions, I have not the slightest idea. If I knew what the price of gold would do, if I knew what the price of any cryptocurrency would do, I think I'd go raise $1 billion and run a hedge fund and make hundreds of millions of dollars a month doing that. And so I think arguably nobody knows what the prices of these assets will do. I think I understand what the question effectively is. The question is, are there people who are today considering gold to be some type of decorrelated asset that says, well, if the financial markets do A, B, C, or D, gold will behave differently, so I want to keep some money in gold because in some type of crisis situations, gold may turn out to be very handy. I believe a little bit of that usage case for younger people, for technologically more literate people, is going to be supplemented by cryptocurrencies. But it's going to be a slow process. It will take time. We'll have to see how stable over time cryptocurrency prices are. I mean, gold prices are a little bit more stable than day to day than cryptocurrency prices. But I do think it might, in some degree, for some customer segments, I can see in a younger generation someone who might have been prone to go buy some gold might think, I want to buy some Bitcoin or Ethereum or Monero or what have you. So it's not an implausible question that it might leak some demand from gold to crypto. In Bitcoin, do coin holders have the ability to propose and vote on changes to the system, or is it only Bitcoin Foundation members and or core developers? Well, Bitcoin Foundation members have nothing to do with this. That's a whole different, it's an organization. They do not actually control Bitcoin in any way. You don't have to be a coin holder. You can or cannot be to propose or vote on changes. Anyone can go. It's an open process. You can submit your ideas, and they'll get debated, and people will think about if they'll incorporate it into the merged client. And then, of course, Bitcoin at the end of the day is really the network of people running a certain set of software. And so let's say Bitcoin Core put something in there that everyone hated. Nobody's going to force you to run that Bitcoin client, right? So it's a very interesting question, who has the power to do what in Bitcoin? But the one thing that I'm sure of, it has nothing to do with the Bitcoin Foundation, and it has nothing to do with if you have or don't have coins. So those two things are for sure. All right. We are exactly on the hour mark. I got almost to all the questions. There was a couple I didn't get to, but pretty good for a first showing. Thank you all for joining the course. Thank you all for submitting questions. Thank you all for participating in the online chat. I love to see, one of the things that I love to see in the online chat is how many different countries everyone's from. I feel like this is globalization in a nutshell. Next week, you will be discussing the Byzantine generals problem with Andreas Antonopoulos. That is a problem of distributed systems and computer science that Bitcoin presented a pretty interesting solution to under certain circumstances. It's, in a way, the most technical view of the issue that Bitcoin solved. The next 6 sessions will be with Andreas Antonopoulos. So he will be taking you first kind of the theory, then you will get into a variety of topics about how to set up a wallet, how to do a transaction, what have you. And then I will circle back, and then we'll talk about how Bitcoin is going to be used in practice in the real world. I would love you to all stay in every session through the end. People sometimes make, in my opinion, incorrect guesses about which sessions are going to be more interesting or not. I think they're all very interesting. So I hope we have good participation all the way through. I wish you a wonderful weekend. And thank you very much, everyone. Welcome to the University of Nicosia family.